The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone streets of downtown as Sarah Martinez hurried toward the grand mansion that had employed her for the past 3 years. Her worn shoes clicked against the pavement in a steady rhythm, each step taking her closer to another day of invisible service in the wealthy Blackwood household. Sarah had learned to move through the world quietly. At 28, she possessed the kind of unremarkable appearance that made her perfect for domestic work. Average height, brown hair always pulled back in a simple bun, and clothes that were clean but clearly second-hand. The Blackwood family barely noticed her presence, which was exactly how she preferred it. Being invisible meant being safe. The mansion loomed ahead, its Gothic architecture a stark reminder of the vast divide between the world she served and the world she truly belonged to. 3 stories of pristine limestone and perfectly manicured gardens spoke of wealth that most people could only imagine. Sarah slipped through the service entrance, hanging her thin jacket on a hook that bore no nameplate. Servants, after all, were interchangeable in the eyes of their employers. "You're late," snapped Mrs. Henderson, the head housekeeper, without looking up from her clipboard. The older woman's gray hair was pulled into a severe bun, and her sharp eyes missed nothing that happened within these walls. "My apologies, Mrs. Henderson. The bus was delayed," Sarah replied softly, already tying her apron around her waist. She had actually walked the entire distance to save the bus fare, but explaining her financial situation would only invite unwanted questions. The Blackwood mansion required constant attention. Every surface gleamed, every flower arrangement was perfect, and every meal was served with military precision. Sarah's duties included cleaning the library, polishing the silver, and assisting with meal service when the family entertained guests. It was honest work, but the pay barely covered her tiny apartment rent and basic necessities. As Sarah began her morning routine of dusting the mahogany furniture in the drawing room, she could hear Mrs. Blackwood's voice echoing from the dining room. Victoria Blackwood was a woman who commanded attention wherever she went. Tall and elegant, with silver hair that never seemed out of place, she moved through her privileged world with the confidence of someone who had never known want. "The charity gala is next week," Mrs. Blackwood was saying to her assistant. "I want everything perfect. The governor will be attending and several board members from the hospital foundation. This event could secure funding for the new wing." Sarah continued her work, listening to the familiar rhythm of wealth and philanthropy that defined the Blackwood family's social calendar. They hosted elaborate fundraising events, wrote substantial checks to various causes, and enjoyed the recognition that came with public generosity. Yet Sarah had noticed that their charity rarely extended beyond the walls of their social circle. The morning passed quickly as Sarah moved through her tasks with practiced efficiency. She had just finished arranging fresh flowers in the front foyer when the doorbell rang. Mrs. Henderson appeared immediately, smoothing her uniform and preparing to greet whatever dignitary or society friend had come to call. Through the ornate glass panels of the front door, Sarah could see a small figure hunched against the morning chill. When Mrs. Henderson opened the door, both women were surprised to find not a guest, but a young girl who couldn't have been more than 12 years old. The child was clearly homeless. Her clothes were too large and bore the telltale signs of sleeping rough, wrinkled fabric, mismatched layers, and shoes that had seen far better days. Her dark hair was tangled and unwashed, and her small face was pale with hunger and exhaustion. Despite her obvious distress, her brown eyes held a dignity that struck Sarah immediately. "Please," the girl said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm very hungry. Could you spare some bread? I haven't eaten in 2 days." Mrs. Henderson's expression immediately hardened. This was not the sort of visitor the Blackwood household was accustomed to receiving. "This is a private residence, child. You need to move along. There are shelters downtown that can help you." The girl took a small step backward but didn't leave. "I tried the shelter, but they're full. I just need a little food, please. I can work for it if you need something done." "Absolutely not," Mrs. Henderson replied firmly. "We cannot have vagrant children begging at our door. It sets a terrible precedent. Now please leave before I call the authorities." Sarah watched the exchange from her position near the staircase, her heart breaking at the sight of the child's obvious desperation. She had been poor herself, had known the gnawing emptiness of real hunger, and recognized the particular kind of exhaustion that came from having nowhere safe to sleep. As Mrs. Henderson began to close the door, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She stepped forward quickly, her hand reaching into her apron pocket, where she kept the small lunch she had packed for herself. "Wait," Sarah called out, approaching the doorway. Mrs. Henderson turned with surprise, clearly not expecting any of the household staff to involve themselves in the situation. "Sarah, return to your duties immediately," the housekeeper commanded. "This is not your concern." But Sarah was already kneeling down to the girl's level, pulling out the simple sandwich and apple she had brought for her own lunch. "Here, sweetie," she said gently, pressing the food into the child's thin hands. "This should help." The girl's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. "Thank you so much," she whispered, clutching the food as if it were precious treasure. "God bless you." Mrs. Henderson's face flushed with anger. "Sarah, how dare you? Return to the kitchen this instant. We will discuss your inappropriate behavior later." As Sarah stood up, she noticed something that made her pause. Mrs. Blackwood had appeared at the top of the grand staircase and was watching the entire scene unfold. The wealthy woman's expression was unreadable, but her sharp blue eyes were taking in every detail of the interaction. The homeless girl hurried away with her precious meal, and Mrs. Henderson slammed the door with unnecessary force. "That was completely unacceptable," she fumed as she turned to face Sarah. "We have policies about solicitors and vagrants for very good reasons. Your bleeding heart nonsense could have put this entire household at risk." Sarah kept her eyes lowered respectfully. "I understand your concerns, Mrs. Henderson. I simply couldn't stand by and watch a hungry child be turned away." "Your job is to follow instructions, not to make decisions about household policy," the housekeeper snapped. "Report to the kitchen and begin preparing vegetables for tonight's dinner. And Sarah, consider this your first and final warning about overstepping your boundaries." As Sarah walked toward the kitchen, she couldn't shake the image of the grateful girl or the feeling that she had done the right thing, regardless of the consequences. She had grown up in foster care herself, bouncing between homes that ranged from indifferent to actively hostile. She knew what it felt like to be invisible, unwanted, and desperately hungry. The kitchen was a bustle of activity as the cooking staff prepared for the day's meals. Sarah took her place at the prep station and began mechanically chopping vegetables, her mind still focused on the encounter at the front door. She had given away her only meal for the day, but seeing the relief in that child's eyes had been worth it. What Sarah didn't know was that Mrs. Blackwood had not returned to her morning routine after witnessing the scene in the foyer. Instead, she had quietly made her way to her private study, where she sat behind her mahogany desk, deep in thought. Victoria Blackwood was not a woman given to impulsive decisions or emotional reactions. Her wealth and social position had been carefully cultivated over decades of strategic thinking and calculated moves. She had married well, invested wisely, and built a reputation as a generous philanthropist and community leader. But something about the scene she had just witnessed had stirred something unexpected in her chest. The contrast between her housekeeper's cold dismissal and her maid's immediate compassion had highlighted something that Victoria had been trying not to acknowledge for some time. For all her charity galas and foundation boards, for all the substantial checks she wrote to worthy causes, Victoria realized that her generosity had become performative. She gave money to causes that would enhance her reputation and increase her social standing, but she had lost touch with the raw human need that charity was meant to address. The homeless girl at her door had been real in a way that her carefully orchestrated philanthropic events were not. And Sarah, the quiet maid who barely spoke unless spoken to, had responded with immediate, genuine compassion. Victoria picked up her phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. "James," she said when her personal attorney answered, "I need you to research something for me, quietly and thoroughly." Over the next several hours, Victoria Blackwood made a series of phone calls and set certain wheels in motion. By the time Sarah finished her kitchen duties and began her afternoon cleaning routine, plans were already being put into place that would soon reveal the true identity of the woman who had spent 3 years moving invisibly through the Blackwood household. As Sarah polished the silver in the formal dining room, she had no idea that her simple act of kindness had been observed by someone who recognized compassion when she saw it. She was focused entirely on her work, trying not to think about how hungry she would be by evening, when Mrs. Henderson appeared in the doorway. "Sarah," the housekeeper said, her tone oddly formal, "Mrs. Blackwood wishes to see you in her study immediately." Sarah's heart sank. She was going to be fired, she was certain of it. Her act of kindness would cost her the job she desperately needed, and she would join the homeless girl on the streets looking for her next meal. She followed Mrs. Henderson through the grand hallways, past oil paintings worth more than most people earned in a year, toward whatever fate awaited her in Victoria Blackwood's private study. What happened next would change everything Sarah thought she knew about her. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she knocked on the heavy oak door of Mrs. Blackwood's study. The room beyond was a sanctuary of wealth and power, lined with leather-bound books and furnished with antiques that cost more than most people's annual salaries. When the familiar voice called for her to enter, Sarah stepped inside with her head bowed respectfully. Victoria Blackwood sat behind her massive desk, but something about her posture seemed different than usual. Instead of the imperious authority Sarah was accustomed to, there was an unusual softness in the older woman's expression. A manila folder lay open on the desk between them, its contents hidden from Sarah's view. "Please sit down," Mrs. Blackwood said, gesturing toward the leather chair across from her desk. This was already unusual. Household staff were rarely invited to sit in the family's presence. Sarah perched nervously on the edge of the chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Mrs. Henderson said you wanted to see me about this morning's incident. I understand if you need to terminate my employment. I know I overstepped my boundaries." "Tell me about your childhood, Sarah," Mrs. Blackwood said quietly, ignoring Sarah's assumption entirely. "Where did you grow up?" The question caught Sarah completely off guard. In 3 years of employment, Mrs. Blackwood had never shown the slightest interest in her personal life. I grew up in the foster care system, ma'am. Several different homes throughout the state." "And your birth parents?" Sarah shifted uncomfortably. This was territory she rarely discussed with anyone. "I was abandoned at a hospital when I was just a few days old. The records were sealed. I never knew anything about my biological family." Mrs. Blackwood opened the folder on her desk and removed a photograph, sliding it across the polished surface toward Sarah. "Do you recognize this woman?" Sarah picked up the photograph with trembling fingers. It showed a young woman who couldn't have been more than 18, with dark hair and familiar brown eyes. She was holding a newborn baby, her face radiating both love and profound sadness. Who is this?" Sarah whispered, though something deep in her heart already knew the answer. "That's my daughter," Mrs. Blackwood said, her voice barely controlled. "And that baby is you, Sarah. You're my granddaughter." The photograph slipped from Sarah's nerveless fingers and fluttered to the floor. The room seemed to spin around her as 28 years of questions suddenly found their answers. "That's impossible," she breathed. "You would have known. You would have recognized me." Victoria stood up slowly and moved around the desk, her composure finally beginning to crack. "Was 17 when she became pregnant. Your father was a boy from school, someone I deemed entirely inappropriate for a girl of her social standing. When I discovered the pregnancy, I was furious. I was young and proud and more concerned with family reputation than with my daughter's happiness." Sarah stared at the photograph on the floor, unable to process what she was hearing. "What happened to her? To my mother?" "I sent her away," Victoria continued, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "To a private facility where she could give birth quietly, away from any potential scandal. The plan was for her to place the baby for adoption and return home to finish her education as if nothing had happened." "But she didn't come home," Sarah said quietly, the pieces beginning to fall into place. "No, died from complications during childbirth. She hemorrhaged and the doctors couldn't save her. My pride, my obsession with maintaining our family's reputation cost me my only child, and it cost you the chance to know your mother." The silence in the study was deafening. Sarah felt as though she was drowning in revelations that changed everything she thought she knew about herself. "Why didn't you try to find me? Why didn't you claim me?" Victoria sank into the chair beside Sarah, suddenly looking every one of her 65 years. "I was consumed by grief and guilt. I blamed myself for death, and I blamed you for taking her from me. It was irrational and cruel, but I wasn't thinking clearly. By the time I came to my senses and tried to locate you, the adoption records had been sealed. I hired private investigators, but they couldn't find any trace of where you'd been placed. So you just gave up. I searched for you for over a decade, Sarah, but I was looking for a little girl named Martinez. I never knew the adoptive family had changed your first name to Sarah. When my investigators finally tracked down the Martinez family, they discovered that you'd been returned to state custody when you were 4 years old." Sarah remembered that family vaguely, the Martinez household where she'd spent her earliest years before being moved to another placement. "They couldn't handle a child with behavioral problems," she said bitterly. "I was too sad, too confused, too much trouble." From there, you disappeared into the foster care system under your new name. The investigators lost your trail completely when you aged out at 18. I never stopped looking, but I had no way to know that you were here in my own house all this time. How did you figure it out today?" Victoria picked up another document from the folder. "After I witnessed your kindness to that homeless girl, I called my attorney. I had him pull your employment records and run a comprehensive background check. The dates matched up, and when I saw your birth certificate, Sarah Martinez, born on the same day, died at the same hospital where I lost my daughter." Sarah stood up abruptly, packing to the window that overlooked the mansion's gardens. Everything she had believed about herself, about her place in the world, had been shattered in the span of 10 minutes. "This doesn't change anything," she said finally. "I'm still the same person I was this morning. I'm still poor, still invisible, still nobody important." "You're my granddaughter," Victoria said firmly. "You're the last living connection I have to your family, Sarah, your home." But Sarah shook her head, turning back to face the woman who claimed to be her grandmother. "Family doesn't employ each other as domestic help. Family doesn't let each other go hungry or struggle to pay rent. If you suspected who I was, why didn't you help me?" Victoria had no answer for that question, and Sarah could see the weight of guilt settling on the older woman's shoulders. The truth was that even if Victoria had suspected, her pride and her long-held grief had prevented her from acknowledging what was right in front of her. "I want to make this right," Victoria said quietly. "I want to give you everything you should have had, education, opportunities, your rightful place in this family." "And what about the person I've become?" Sarah asked. "What about the woman who works hard for everything she has, who understands what it means to be hungry, who recognizes suffering when she sees it? Do you want to erase that person and turn me into someone else?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment, considering her granddaughter's words. This morning when I watched you give your lunch to that homeless girl, I saw something that I'd lost sight of years ago. Real compassion. Immediate, genuine kindness that asked for nothing in return. You acted without thinking about consequences or appearances or what anyone might think. You just saw someone in need and helped them. Because I've been that child, Sarah said simply. I know what it feels like to be desperate and invisible. I've written checks to homeless shelters for decades, Victoria continued. I've funded soup kitchens and job training programs and transitional housing projects. But I'd forgotten that charity isn't about tax deductions or social recognition. It's about seeing another human being's need and responding with your heart. Sarah moved back to her chair, studying the woman who claimed to be her grandmother. What happens now? That depends on you, Victoria replied. I can't undo the 28 years we've lost, and I can't bring back, but I can try to be the family you deserved to have all along. I don't want your money, Sarah said firmly. I don't want to be some pet project or guilt offering. If we're going to have any kind of relationship, it has to be real. Victoria nodded slowly. Then perhaps you can teach me how to be real again. You can help me understand what genuine compassion looks like. Through the study's tall windows, Sarah could see the homeless girl from that morning sitting in the mansion's garden. She had returned, probably hopping for more food or perhaps just seeking a safe place to rest. Without asking permission, Sarah walked to the window and unlocked it. Hey, she called down to the girl. Are you still hungry? The child looked up with surprise and hope. Yes, miss, very hungry. Sarah turned to Victoria. If you really want to make things right, let's start here. Not with grand gestures or charity galas, but with one child who needs help right now. Victoria joined Sarah at the window, looking down at the girl who had inadvertently brought a scattered family back together. What's your name, dear? She called out. Emma, the girl replied. Emma. Emma, would you like to come inside for a proper meal? And perhaps we can help you find a safe place to stay tonight. The girl's face lit up with disbelief and gratitude. Really? You'd do that? Victoria looked at Sarah, seeing her granddaughter's approval in her warm smile. Yes, Emma, really. As they made their way downstairs to welcome Emma inside, Sarah felt something shifting in her chest. The anger and hurt of 28 years of abandonment were still there, but they were being joined by something else. Hope. Hope that she had finally found family, and hope that together they could create something better than either of them had managed alone. Mrs. Henderson appeared in the hallway, clearly flustered by the sight of the homeless girl being invited into the mansion's formal spaces. Mrs. Blackwood, surely you don't intend to— Mrs. Henderson, Victoria interrupted firmly, I'd like you to meet Emma. She'll be joining us for dinner tonight. And this is Sarah Martinez Blackwood, my granddaughter. I trust you'll treat her with the respect due to a family member. The housekeeper's mouth fell open in shock, but she quickly recovered her composure. Of course, Mrs. Blackwood, Miss Sarah. I'll have the guest room prepared immediately. As they walked toward the dining room, Sarah felt the weight of her true identity settling around her like a new coat. She was no longer just the invisible maid who cleaned in silence. She was Victoria Blackwood's granddaughter, heir to wealth and position she had never dreamed of possessing. But more importantly, she was still the woman who recognized hunger when she saw it, who understood the value of kindness, who knew that compassion was worth more than money. The real question was whether she could hold onto that person while navigating her new reality. Emma walked between Sarah and Victoria, her eyes wide with wonder at the mansion's opulent surroundings. "Are you really going to help me?" she asked quietly. Sarah knelt down to meet Emma's eyes. "We're going to do more than help you, sweetie. We're going to make sure you have everything you need to build a good life." As they entered the grand dining room where Sarah had served countless meals to the Blackwood family, she realized that everything was about to change. The question was whether those changes would bring her closer to the person she was meant to be, or pull her away from the values that had shaped her into someone capable of recognizing need and responding with love. 6 months after the revelation that had changed everything, Sarah stood in the mansion's library reviewing documents that would have seemed impossible to understand just a year ago. She had traded her maid's uniform for professional attire, but her approach to the Blackwood family foundation remained refreshingly practical. The transformation had not been easy. Victoria had wanted to shower Sarah with immediate wealth and privileges, but Sarah had insisted on earning her place gradually. She had continued working as a maid for 2 months while taking night classes in business and nonprofit management. Only when she felt prepared to contribute meaningfully had she accepted a position as Director of Community Outreach for the Blackwood Foundation. Emma had become the Foundation's first success story under Sarah's direction. Rather than simply placing the 12-year-old in another temporary situation, Sarah had worked with social services to find Emma a loving foster family. The foundation now funded Emma's education, provided counseling support, and maintained a scholarship fund that would see her through college. But Emma's case had been just the beginning. Sarah had revolutionized the foundation's approach to charity work, moving away from impersonal check writing toward hands-on community engagement. She had established a homeless outreach program, a job training center, and an emergency assistance fund that helped families avoid eviction and hunger. "The quarterly reports look excellent," Victoria said, entering the library with her morning coffee. The relationship between grandmother and granddaughter had evolved into something stronger than either of them had expected. "The job training program has placed 87 people in permanent employment." Sarah looked up from her papers, smiling at the woman who had become both family and mentor. Emma helped with those statistics. She volunteers at the center every Saturday, helping other kids with their homework while their parents attend training sessions. Victoria settled into the chair across from Sarah's desk. At 65, she had never been more energetic or engaged. Working alongside Sarah had given her a sense of purpose that decades of social philanthropy had never provided. Speaking of Emma, she called yesterday about the summer program application. She's been accepted to the youth leadership camp. "She's remarkable," Sarah said proudly. "From homeless and desperate to honor roll student and community volunteer in just 6 months. It shows what's possible when you give someone real support instead of just temporary help. The library door opened, and Mrs. Henderson entered, her demeanor much changed from the stern housekeeper who had once tried to turn away a hungry child. Working with the foundation had softened her edges, and she now managed the operational aspects of their community programs with genuine warmth. "Miss Sarah, there's a young man at the front door. Says he's looking for work and heard that the foundation sometimes helps with job placement. Should I direct him to the center downtown?" Sarah shook her head, standing up immediately. "I'll talk to him here. How many times have we learned that bureaucracy can be a barrier when someone is desperate for help?" She made her way to the front entrance where a man in his early 20s waited nervously. His clothes were clean but worn, and he carried himself with the particular tension of someone who had been unemployed for too long. When he saw Sarah approaching, he straightened up respectfully. "I'm Sarah Martinez Blackwood," she said, extending her hand. "I understand you're looking for work." "Yes, ma'am. I heard your foundation helps people find jobs. I've been looking for 8 months now, and I'm getting pretty desperate. Lost my apartment last week." Sarah invited into the front parlor, the same room where she had once polished furniture as an invisible servant. "Tell me about your background. What kind of work are you looking for?" "I'm a certified auto mechanic, but the shop where I worked closed down when the owner retired. Most places want experience with newer computerized systems, and I can't afford the training courses to get certified on the new equipment." "How long were you at your previous job?" 7 years. Started there right out of high school. Mister taught me everything I know, but his equipment was older. I'm good with my hands and I learn fast, but nobody wants to take the time to train anymore. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. This was exactly the kind of situation the foundation was designed to address. "What if I told you we could get you into a certified training program for computerized automotive systems? It's a 6-week intensive course, and we'd cover the costs plus provide a living stipend while you're in training." His eyes widened with disbelief. "You do that? Why, you don't even know me." "Because everyone deserves a chance to build a stable life," Sarah replied simply. "Because I know what it's like to go to bed hungry and wake up worried about where your next meal is coming from. Because kindness should be the default response when someone asks for help." Victoria appeared in the doorway, having overheard the conversation. "We have partnerships with several automotive dealerships and repair shops in the area. When you complete your training, we can help you find placement with employers who value skilled workers." "I don't understand," said, looking between the two women. "This seems too good to be true. What's the catch?" Sarah smiled, remembering her own disbelief when Victoria had first revealed their family connection. "The only catch is that we ask program graduates to volunteer occasionally with our youth mentorship initiative. Help kids understand that there are paths to stable careers that don't require college degrees." "You want me to talk to kids about auto repair?" "We want you to show them that honest work has dignity, that learning a trade can provide a good living, and that everyone's story matters," Victoria explained. "Sarah has taught me that the most powerful charity isn't just giving money, It's helping people discover their own potential. Wiped his eyes, clearly overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness. When could I start the training program? Monday, if you're ready, Sarah replied. We'll need to get you set up with temporary housing at our transitional facility. It's not luxury accommodations, but it's clean and safe, and there's a cafeteria that serves good meals. After left with enrollment paperwork and directions to the transitional housing facility, Sarah and Victoria returned to the library. The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the space where Sarah had once dusted books she never expected to read. "Do you ever miss it?" Victoria asked quietly. "The simplicity of life before you knew about all this?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "I miss the clarity sometimes. When I was just trying to survive, the priorities were simple: food, shelter, safety. Now there are board meetings and investment decisions and community partnerships to manage. But I don't miss the fear or the loneliness." "I've been thinking about a lot lately," Victoria continued. "About what kind of person she might have become, what kind of mother she would have been to you." "She would have been like you are now," Sarah said with certainty. "Generous and kind, but practical about how to really help people. I think she would have been proud of what we've built together." Victoria reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a small velvet box. "I've been saving this for the right moment. It was your mother's. Her grandmother's engagement ring. Was supposed to inherit it on her 18th birthday, but—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. Sarah opened the box to reveal a simple but elegant ring with a single diamond surrounded by smaller gems. It was beautiful without being ostentatious, valuable without being showy. "I'd like you to have it," Victoria said. "Not because of what it's worth financially, but because it connects you to the family history you never got to know." Sarah slipped the ring onto her right hand, where it caught the afternoon light. "I'll treasure it, but you know what I treasure more? The fact that Emma calls you Grandma now. The way looked when he realized someone believed in him. The knowledge that we're changing lives every day." A knock on the library door interrupted their conversation. Mrs. Henderson peered inside with a familiar expression of contained excitement. "Miss Sarah, there's a call for you from the mayor's office. Something about the governor wanting to meet with you about expanding the job training program statewide." Sarah laughed, shaking her head at how dramatically her world had changed. "A year ago, the most important call I got was from the employment agency telling me about a housekeeping position. Now the governor wants to discuss policy." "But you're still the same person who gave away her lunch to a hungry child," Victoria reminded her. "That's what matters. That's what makes you perfect for this work." As Sarah headed to take the call from the governor's office, she paused in the doorway to look back at her grandmother. Victoria was reading through grant applications, her reading glasses perched on her nose, completely absorbed in the work of helping others. The mansion that had once seemed like a symbol of the vast divide between rich and poor had become something else entirely. A headquarters for compassion, a place where real change was planned and implemented. The wealth that Victoria had accumulated over decades was finally being used for its highest purpose: lifting others up. Emma appeared in the hallway, her school backpack slung over her shoulder. At 12, she had grown confident and articulate, her natural intelligence flourishing now that she had stability and support. She was spending the afternoon at the mansion, as she did every day after school, working on homework in the library and helping with foundation correspondence. "Sarah," Emma called out excitedly, "I got my acceptance letter from the summer science camp. They're going to let me work in a real laboratory." Sarah hurried over to hug the girl who had inadvertently brought her family together. "I'm so proud of you, Em. You've worked incredibly hard for this." "I want to study medicine," Emma announced. "I want to help people the way you and Grandma helped me. Maybe I'll become a doctor and work with homeless kids." "You can become anything you want to be," Sarah assured her, "and we'll be here to support you every step of the way." As Sarah finally made her way to take the call from the governor's office, she reflected on the chain of events that had led to this moment. A homeless girl asking for bread, a maid choosing compassion over caution, a wealthy woman rediscovering the true meaning of generosity, a family reunited across decades of separation and loss. The transformation had rippled outward from that single moment of kindness, changing not just their individual lives, but creating a model for how wealth and privilege could be used to address systemic problems rather than just treating symptoms. During her conversation with the governor's representative, Sarah found herself explaining their philosophy. Real charity isn't about giving people fish or even teaching them to fish. It's about making sure they have access to the pond, the equipment, and the knowledge they need to feed themselves and their families permanently. When she finished the call, Sarah walked out onto the mansion's front steps where she had once watched a desperate child walk away with a precious sandwich. The garden was full now, not just with flowers, but with people. Was there, having returned from his first day of training, talking with two other program participants about computerized diagnostic systems. Emma was helping a younger boy with his reading, both of them sitting on a bench under the oak tree. Victoria was walking through the garden with a woman Sarah recognized as a graduate of their financial literacy program, discussing the woman's plans to open a small catering business. Mrs. Henderson appeared beside Sarah, carrying a tray of sandwiches and fruit for the visitors. "Strange to think it all started with one hungry child at our door," she mused. "Not strange," Sarah replied, watching the scene of organized compassion unfolding before them. "Perfect. Sometimes the biggest changes begin with the smallest acts of kindness." As the sun began to set over the mansion grounds, Sarah felt a deep sense of contentment settling over her. She had found her family, discovered her identity, and created a legacy of service that would outlast them all. But more than that, she had proven that wealth without compassion was meaningless, and that true generosity came not from the size of one's bank account, but from the size of one's heart. The homeless girl who had asked for bread had received far more than she'd requested. She had received hope, opportunity, and the chance to build a life of dignity and purpose. In return, she had given Sarah and Victoria something equally precious, the opportunity to transform their wealth into real, lasting change. Emma looked up from her tutoring session and waved at Sarah, her bright smile a reminder that every life touched by genuine kindness had the potential to touch countless others in return. This was the true measure of success, not what you accumulated for yourself, but what you made possible for others. And it had all begun with a simple request. Please, could you spare some bread? The answers would come soon enough. But for now, Sarah was content to sit down at the family table for the first time in her life, with her grandmother beside her and a hungry child safe in their care life, her identity and her place in the world. But as she approached the heavy wooden door of the study, all she could think about was the grateful smile of a hungry child who had reminded her that kindness was always the right choice, no matter what it cost.